Okay, you guys are in charge of this video. We've been asking you for your questions to put to us on the sofas, and for the next however many minutes, however long this video lasts, we are at the mercy of what you've been asking us. So let's start. We've got Ed Straw and Stuart Codling here with me to go through the questions. And Gavin M asks, if there were no regulations in F1 and teams could design and build the cars however they pleased, how would the cars look? Who's going to take that one on first?
It would look like something from Wacky Races, I think, wouldn't it?
Certainly wouldn't look like the McLaren, I'd say that.
They would probably look a bit more optimal than that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, well, we've seen various car concepts. People like Adrian Newey have
Yeah.
produced these, what they could look if the regulations were freer. I think the interesting thing is that whatever happens, they probably look relatively similar to each other as well, even though the regulations are tighter, because they are not as tight, rather, because the understanding that the teams share of what they're trying to achieve will be similar. Ultimately, there's all sorts of things you can look at. The levels of downforce you could achieve, the corner speeds, and you start asking, well, would drivers be wearing G suits, etc. You know, you could. I think they'd look a bit more jet fightery. That tends to be common practice for the images of this, but there's all sorts of things, you know, multiple wheels. Obviously, F1 cars do have multiple wheels, but more than 4 wheels. You could have 6, 8 wheels. Who knows what ideas would emerge? So that there is some benefit in having some control over this. It'd be brilliant, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. There's also the question of a lot of it would be under the skin if there were no regulations, because there's so much technology that wouldn't necessarily affect the bulk of what the car looks like, but it's the things you could pack in there. That there's all kinds of technology at the moment that's banned, of course, isn't there?
Yeah, you could have all the electronic driver assistance programs that have been banned, probably rightly so, I think we'd all agree. All sorts of other stuff. The hybrid systems could be jacked up. Some people might want to get rid of their hybrid systems entirely. Other people might want to go fully electric or have more electric input, depending on which manufacturer was pulling their strings and what the marketing department wanted them to say. I also think, based on what Ed said, that I'm sure a lot of them would start off looking a little bit different, but they're one season down the line, they would all start looking like the one that was the fastest.
You always copy the best ideas.
Exactly.
Don't you?
Under the skin, they would be like the one that went the fastest as well.
And it would be, you know, all these things have been banned: 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steering, CVT. All these technologies would appear. So if people think it's difficult now in terms of the driver's challenge of operating these and controlling it, it would be a million times the challenge with an unrestricted thing. But wouldn't it be brilliant if someone built it? No one would be able to afford to, but it would be fantastic.
One step on from what we've seen from Porsche, wouldn't it, with the 919 Evo?
Yeah.
On the same,
like Can-Am in the glory days.
There we go. They look like Can-Am cars.
Yeah.
On the same theme, Kevin Fitzgerald asks us, is there any hope, or any real hope, that F1 rules and regulations will ever become less prescriptive, allowing for a bit more creativity between the designers? Now, this is a huge topic of debate in F1 constantly. The rules seem to just restrict what the designers, the geniuses in the teams are capable of doing. Do we ever think that perhaps with the 2021 changes, are we really going to get more open rules or just a different set of tight rules?
Well, it's not going that way, because we've seen these car concepts. So Formula One's got an idea of what it wants the cars to look like. And in order to achieve that, you've got to be more prescriptive with the rules. That's the irony, really, that the more you want the cars to look cool in a certain way, the more you have to control and prescribe what they're going to look like. I don't think that's going to be the direction, because ultimately, the freer the rules are, the more avenues of investigation and R&D teams can do, and the bigger the gap between the haves and the have-nots will be. Maybe if you've got an actual workable budget cap that can be enforced and is sensible, you might be able to do something.
Yes, engineers, designers want to think outside the box, as it were. That's what they're there for. But unfortunately, if it's allowed, you do need to have a box, because otherwise it would go pretty crazy, it would get spendy, and it would be a question of who could spend the most.
And we potentially have the risk of the teams becoming even more spread out as well, wouldn't we?
Yeah, it's inevitable.
Yeah. Rob Morgan asked, this is a very long question, but I'll summarise it for you. His basic point is, when you have drivers like Hamilton and Vettel repeatedly in the best cars, how can we really know that they are the best drivers on the grid? And he uses the example of Fernando Alonso, who's constantly having to deliver in substandard machinery as an example of that. So how would you kind of approach that subject? Are Hamilton and Vettel the best, or are they just the best drivers in the best cars?
Well, the cream does rise. There's no question about that. We have seen, Alonso's a classic example, doing great things in a poor car. Singapore Grand Prix, he was outstanding. I think he was one of the drivers in the driver ratings after the race that I gave 10, because you couldn't...
Class B winner.
Exactly, yeah, you couldn't fault his performance. We have seen Lewis Hamilton, 2009 McLaren, part of that year. It improved as the season went on, but he turned in some very, very good performances when that car was at its worst. This is what these best drivers are able to do. They're able to perform in any conditions.
Cream does curdle when it's been around too long out of the fridge, though, doesn't it? And that's probably why the cream ends up driving suboptimal ground vehicles like this. The fact is that Fernando Alonso isn't in a Mercedes or Ferrari because he's alienated the people who possibly open up those seats to him. If you're going to be a successful driver, you have to do the softly diplomacy outside the cockpit as well. You need to deliver on all fronts. And the fact is that some drivers might be very, very quick once they're in the car, but they are, we'll mention no names, but there is a venerable team who said of one driver who was very successful for them in the past that it would just be nice if you could get some sort of crane or helicopter arrangement to drop him into the cockpit. He would then drive it. When he returned the car to the pits after winning the race, the same device would remove him from the cockpit and their sight, so they didn't have to deal with him until the next race weekend.
We do also have to remember that when you're in a front-running car, the scrutiny is intense. The difference between winning and finishing second is massive, and that scrutiny does mean that any weaknesses in drivers are laid bare, and teams see it, particularly the championship contending teams need to win championships. So if you're expected to do that, the scrutiny is even higher. Lower down the grid, you can sometimes get away with the odd up and down performance without it being noticed so well, but you've got to perform day in, day out. That's why Lewis Hamilton's won 69 Grand Prix. It's not because he's in the best car. He's in the best car because he's also one of the best drivers, arguably the best driver.
Yeah, you used to get some drivers who would pop up and be great at some races and then be absolutely anonymous at others, and Sergio Perez was a classic one for that. But he has improved his craft, so maybe if those people do get the opportunity and get the right tuition and accept coaching, they might improve themselves. At the end of the day, they have to want to improve and learn and be better.
That's all part of becoming a great sportsman, isn't it? It's not purely talent, it's everything else that comes with it. Moving on, Gazadeb asks, what is your opinion on the long-standing team payment? It's particularly Ferrari. Why do Ferrari deserve this? They get an extra payment regardless of where they finish in the championship. So there have been years recently where Ferrari can finish something like a distant fourth in the constructors and still be the team that takes home the most money at the end of the season. Surely using that to increase the prize fund for everybody else would be a better use of that money. What do we think of Ferrari's payment and the general payment structure at the moment we have in F1?
Well, Ferrari is one of a number of teams. There's different names for the various payments that successful teams of the past do get extra money for who they are. Even Williams get a fairly small one for their historic success, but Ferrari's obviously the big one. Ultimately, you can argue that Ferrari's given a lot to Formula One, which it has. They've been there from the start of the World Championship almost. So you have to say, yeah, they do merit it from that perspective. But also, Formula One's given an enormous amount to Ferrari. It's basically its marketing platform, pretty much. So if you want a sport to be as competitive as possible, you need to find ways to help level the playing field. It's one thing to say, right, if you're first in the Constructors' Championship, you get the biggest amount of money, because you can say that's a meritocracy. And that's different to if you say, you could go completely the other way and say, well, if you're last, you get the advantage, you get more. Some would say that's going too far, that would be an interesting thing to do. But when you're just giving people cash for being who they are, for simply existing and turning up, that's questionable. I mean, all credit to Ferrari and these teams for negotiating. They've had to battle hard to get these, but it's not good for the sporting landscape.
Ferrari know their importance to the Formula One brand, and the fact that they get this payment is acknowledgement that certainly when these agreements were negotiated, Bernie Ecclestone appreciated the value and was prepared to give them that bung, because he was a infamously sharp negotiator. So if he felt that he had to give them that money, it was because it was probably the least possible that he could possibly get away with. But even when he was a 500cc Formula 3 driver back in the day, you look back, Ferrari have always known their value. They didn't even compete in the first World Championship Grand Prix because the starting money wasn't enough for them. So they said, well, if you're not going to offer us what we want, we're just not going to come and race. And so history records no Ferraris in the 1950 British Grand Prix at Silverstone.
It's a rare quit threat that they actually went through with.
Yes, they quit before it even
Exactly,
started.
yeah. Moving on, this question is from #JustSaying. Why is F1 not changing as fans are exiting? There's going to be no live free TV, no racing and no heroes. That's quite a negative question.
It's not even a question, it's stating a position.
There are
A position that
there
I
is some
contend is
racing.
wrong.
Some races are more exciting than others. Singapore wasn't great, obviously, last weekend, but we've had some good racing this year. Arguably, the current model of cars that we have that are so aero-dependent don't allow them to follow very closely. But are some of these problems perhaps things that we can expect to change when the big overhaul comes in 2021?
Well, they're trying. The 2021 rules are based on research, trying to improve the performance of the cars in turbulence to make them less sensitive to that turbulence and to generate less turbulence. It's not just turbulence, but it's also the interaction of these powerful vortexes that are generated, the vortices that are generated that interact with different parts of the car, and you often have them sort of trailing off the back of the car as well, and they create all sorts of weird interactions. So it's not just the air's unstable, you've got these sort of uncontrolled, discarded vortices causing problems. So they are looking at it. I mean, there is racing, there are heroes, there are problems, clearly, but Formula One's trying to, but there aren't easy answers. This is the trouble. Formula One, for quite a long time now, has posited easy answers to this. Oh, do this, it'll be brilliant. Do this, it'll be brilliant. But it's not. It doesn't work like that. These are very, very complicated machines, even that one. And just to sort of say, well, you do this, or you make the wings really simple, it's not that straightforward. What is encouraging is the research that they're doing to try and understand this and make sure that what changes they do make, as far as possible, do have the intended effect, and also to try and understand the unintended consequences. Of course, the law of unintended consequences is one of the most potent in the universe, so they just always will be there.
Yeah. Codders, would you say that #JustSaying needs to keep the faith?
I think that just like Bon Jovi, he should keep the faith. The fact is, people have always moaned about the state of motor racing. When I was researching one of my books a few years ago, I came across
like a
cheap plug.
Yeah, sorry, cheap plug. One of my picture books.
Of course, yeah. Not a photographer.
Yeah, exactly. I came across a piece by Dennis Jenkinson in Motorsport magazine from the 1970s, headlined, "And When Did You Lose Interest?" And in it, he was just sounding off about these people he actually despised who had come sidling up to him in motor racing paddocks and size up because they thought, he's an old man with a beard, he's going to hate modern motor racing. And they'd say, "When did you lose interest?" I hate it with all these cars with sponsorship. And he listed all the little sort of gateway drugs of choice that these people chose as the bit where they'd lost interest in Formula One. And it was, I hated the Alfa Romeos when they came in and ruined it. And there were people who, even in the 1970s, wanted it to go back to how it was in the 1930s. So I think, given that motor racing is all about racing cars, axiomatically, one car will be the fastest. If that car then happens to have the quickest driver, that car will generally win. It's always been like that. It's been like that since Nuvolari's first got his licence stamped. So to say it's not motor racing anymore is ridiculous. You look back to the 1960s, I'm ranting now, aren't I? You go back to the 1960s, there were races where only 5 cars finished and maybe 2 of them were on the lead lap if you were lucky. That wasn't racing, that was just survival. So I think we're doing pretty well. Sorry, #JustSaying.
We've come a long way.
End of.
I'd say none of that is an argument for not doing anything and saying it's all great.
Yeah.
But it's equally as wrong to say everything's terrible as it is to say everything's great.
Yeah, you don't just hit the emergency switch. It just becomes like that bit in Monty Python, doesn't it? Follow the good, no, follow the shoe. And unintended consequences ensue when we just make knee-jerk reactions to perceived problems without actually rigorously evaluating what the problem is and identifying possible solutions. And as Ed says, that is happening at the moment. We are, at the moment, or Formula One, is actually undergoing a properly rigorous investigation into how to make overtaking better without just a man from the commercial department saying, "Here, make the front wings bigger, make the back, put bigger tyres on."
And the other thing, of course, is just talking about aerodynamics, unless you're going to run Grand Prix in vacuum, it's going to be a problem. It is an object moving through the air. So by definition, you can't get rid of aerodynamics.
No, it's about reducing it rather than eliminating it. Isn't
Exactly.
it?
You try and mitigate it. You try and understand it. Difficult task, though. These cars are incredibly complicated.
Yeah. Let's move on. Stelian Georgiev asks, can Vettel still win the championship this year?
He can, he might not.
But will he?
He can, he won't.
Easy.
40 points.
40 points
40
behind.
points for 6 races around. To clarify that, if Mercedes and Hamilton keep doing what they're doing, if they don't have unreliability problems, if they don't make mistakes, which isn't what's happening at the moment, they're going on nicely, then there's no chance for Vettel to catch up. when you're up ahead, it gives you a certain degree of control over situations rather than forcing the issues. Vettel said, well, we've got to try and win all 6 races now. As soon as you're trying to force the issue, they're trying to force the issue in Singapore. And ultimately, it's trying to force the issue against Hamilton to have half a chance of winning, but cost them second place to Verstappen. It just, you can't make your decisions the way you want them to. And that's why, all things being equal, Hamilton should win the championship. Vettel, unfortunately, and Ferrari, because they played a part in that, have lost too many points.
We sort of talked about this a bit in the podcast at the weekend, didn't we?
Available for all good podcast
Emporiums, Emporia,
etc.
Is it Emporium or Emporia? Is it a Latin root or a Greek root?
I think you spectacularly missed the point of this plug. The point is subscribe.
Subscribe to the podcast.
What was the question?
No one remembers.
We discussed this with reference to the rugby team of which I'm a long-suffering season ticket holder, which is that when you get to the tail end of a season and you are in a position where you need to win every round and you need your opposition to start losing, you're on a very sticky wicket, because that affects everything. It puts more pressure on everyone concerned, and also it just narrows your options down. At the beginning of the season, you can drop a couple of results. At the end of a season, if you are that far behind that you have to win every one, you are just diminishing your chance of succeeding.
I hope it goes down to the wire, though. It's not looking like it will, but it's been a great championship. It'd be a shame if it was resolved.
I'm sure the promoters of Abu Dhabi would like it to go down to the wire again rather than being a dead rubber.
Changing tact a little bit now, Marge asks, what's the biggest misconception about working in motorsport that you want to set straight once and for all?
That we fly in first class.
That was a good one. I was thinking actually as well, that the glamour of the travel. We all love going to all these race circuits. We've grown up as fans, and if you're going to visit these countries, quite often the place we want to go and see are the racetracks. But that does mean quite often, long flights in cattle class and staying in some pretty low rent hotels as well. So it's not quite as glamorous as some people like to think. Ed, anything else?
Yeah, although I would say, it's all worth it for what you get to do.
Yeah.
I might occasionally complain about it, but it's not a bad way to make a living. I think the thing with motorsport, and certainly in terms of what we're doing as well, is that people just want to see good racing. Actually, even drivers want to see good racing. I've said Lewis Hamilton's going to win the championship. I don't say that because he's my favourite driver and I want him to. I say that because looking at the facts, it looks like he will do. What you actually want to see is racing. And even the teams and the drivers will admit, actually, I quite like it to be a little bit close. Obviously, they're going to do the best to make sure it's not close, because that's the aim. But people, for the most part in motorsport, there's some hangers-on, there's some who are there for the money, etc., etc. But at heart, and it's journalists, drivers, mechanics, catering people, there's just real enthusiasm for the whole sport. They do care about it.
You work in it because you're fans, don't you?
Exactly. They just want to see good racing and to be able to enjoy the environment, and that's what it's about.